Good afternoon, folks. Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilia here, taking a look at the tropical update for August 27th of 2019, brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling. They're doing more now. Again, the tropics a little more active. Things are heating up a little bit. Thankfully, not close to home. Into the Gulf of Mexico, things are looking good. We've got some showers and thunderstorms moving this direction for South Mississippi, associated actually with a front. There was an explosion of convective, watch this, just whoosh across parts of Oklahoma. But we're not going to talk about that. We're talking about what's going on in the tropics. We've got Dorian down here, and we've got Tropical Depression number 6 up there. Out into the open Atlantic, there's not really much happening until you get near the coast of Africa. But let's start out with the Tropical Depression number 6, so wind at 35 miles an hour. This is going to be lifting off to the north and back around to the northeast as we head through the next couple of days. Right now moving north at 2 miles an hour. This isn't going to bother us. It isn't actually going to really bother anybody unless you're out in a boat. It's Dorian that's going to bother a lot of folks. It's already went through the greater and lesser Antilles. It kind of fell apart as it did so. Currently with wind at 50 miles an hour, gusting to 65. This is as of the 1 o'clock advisory. The new one comes out here in, I don't know, roughly about 30 to 45 minutes. Moving west-northwest at 13 miles an hour. You can see it's grown a little bit in size, but that's also because it's lost a lot of its cohesion as it rolled across the greater and lesser Antilles. You can also see that the trade wind's rolling up against the back edge of this thing. It's starting to fire up some thunderstorms on the back side of this as well. It's been sitting between dry air and a little bit of shear out here, but it's going to get to an area where it's a little more conducive for development for the next couple of days before it runs into Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and Haiti, Hispaniola. It's going to try and slide somewhere between the two islands, depending on how much of the islands it hits is going to dictate just how strong it is as it passes by. Right now, the National Hurricane Center is suggesting that it makes it through there as still a tropical storm. That said, it barely made it through these piddly little islands, and no offense to those islands, they're just much smaller in comparison to Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, and it kind of got ripped up by those. It's a small storm, so it's going to struggle to pass through the islands unscathed. Can it do it? Sure it can. Can we get hit by a meteor tomorrow? Sure we can. It'll just have to be one of those things where we wait and see. And unfortunately, once it gets to the north, then we're going to get a much better idea. But at that point, it is a whole lot closer to the Bahamas, Florida, and the Gulf of Mexico, which, yes, the Gulf of Mexico is in the cone as you head through Sunday morning. So for those of you that live along the Gulf Coast between Corpus Christi and all the way back around to Tampa, I know you folks watch this video every day. That's starting Sunday and into the following week is when this thing, when Dorian, may be close enough to us for us to get, I guess, concerned about. At this point, though, between all the modeling and the forecast itself, it does have it moving a little bit closer to Florida. There is still the outside chance, though, that it stays out to sea and doesn't bother anybody. More on Dorian here in a hot second. I also wanted to highlight the fact that the last wave to come off the coast of Africa really fell apart, but there is one back in behind it and one back in behind that also that may do something out into the Atlantic as we head through days 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. All right, back to Dorian we go. The spaghetti plots in full effect mode here. You can see that they're all pretty close together. I mean, this looks kind of far apart because we're zoomed way in. But I mean, we're talking from one side of Puerto Rico to the Dominican Republic and Haiti in terms of your west to east longitude here. Through Thursday, it's this spread, and this is why I say we got to wait until Thursday afternoon and evening. It's the spread between the forecast track within the models that is going to dictate a lot of what happens beyond that point. Because if it rides through the middle of Hispaniola, it's going to get eaten for breakfast, and it may not plop out on the other side as much more than a wave or a tropical depression. If it takes this far western or far eastern trek and goes on the east side of Puerto Rico, it's going to be over water, and Puerto Rico, a much smaller and much shorter island. It wouldn't get beat up quite as much as it passed through. There's a chance that it goes right through the straits between Haiti and Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. So between Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, it may sneak through there, which it would leave it reasonably unscathed as well. Or it may fly right over the top of Puerto Rico or right over the top of the Hispaniola. So Depends on where it goes, unfortunately, and the spread between these models, you see how they were a little bit closer down here, a little bit further apart up here. It's that spread that unfortunately is going to dictate what happens, I think, a little further down the road, because you can see that the models actually get a little closer together further down the road. But because they get a little further apart back here, there's still a little bit of uncertainty. I'm going to take this out a little further through Sunday afternoon, and you can see that there are some models that keep it, again, still out to sea, not bothering a soul out here, except for, again, some boats. Others actually do take it into the Gulf of Mexico, and this is why that matters. The 26-degree isotherm, and looking at some ocean heat content in the Gulf. Your surface temperature, we all know that's nice and good and warm. But underneath that, the 26-degree isotherm, we've got a little lip in here, a little tongue of some warmer water, and then the loop current out here as well. We pay attention to this because should Dorian get into the straits between Florida and Cuba and get itself into the Gulf of Mexico, it'll have plenty of warm water to work with. In fact, you really only need kind of the greenish shading in here to sustain a hurricane and to develop a hurricane. You guys remember Michael from just a year ago? That slid up. Actually, it followed just on the outside of one of these little tongues of warmer water and stayed over kind of this greenish coloring in terms of depth of warm water, and well, we all know, really blew up. We can double check our answers there by looking at the sea height anomaly. We can say, okay, cool, warmer stuff expands. Well, that expansion is shown here and here, right where all the warmer water was. We can then take that and plop over where the spaghettis are taking it, and most of the spaghetti models do take it into, again, Florida. And then they do start to kind of curve it back off to the north, and the question remains, how soon are we curving? Are we curving back to the north as it's still out to sea? Are we curving back to the north as it's into the Gulf of Mexico? Or unfortunately, would we have to wait even longer for it to curve off to the north? And that, well, remains to be seen. We're going to have to wait, honestly, folks, until I think after Thursday to get a better idea about what's going to happen. But since you're here, let's take a peek at what things look like as we head through the next couple of days. In terms of where Dorian is down here as we head through Wednesday, it's getting to the north and toward the Bahamas as we head through Friday on our 700 millibar moisture, 850 vorticity map. So there's Dorian there. Notice all the dry air back in behind it is really thinned out. Of course, the dry air, that's the gray shaded out areas. That's the places where we're not concerned about development because it's too dry. But the GFS does take it into Florida, but watch what happens in here. That's Sunday. Watch what happens as we head through Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It doesn't really move because there's not a lot of steering flow out here once it does move ashore. And that could create a problem, not necessarily just the immediate one that comes to mind, which is flooding for the poor folks in Georgia, Florida, and maybe even parts of Alabama and South Carolina. But the concern may be, well, what if it doesn't make it into Florida? What if it parks off the coast? What if it parks into the Gulf of Mexico? These are things that we just don't know at this point, but unfortunately are in the cards. Let's head over to the European model. There's the tropical depression number 6 tightening up and moving off to the northeast. We'll track Dorian here into the Bahamas. Interesting thing with the European is it takes it into the west coast of Florida, into the Gulf of Mexico, and up to around Mobile and Pensacola as we head through Tuesday of next week, while simultaneously developing yet another area of low pressure down toward Mexico and Texas. This one then curves it back around through parts of Mississippi. That would bring us a whole lot more rain around here, not necessarily any kind of dire hurricane situation, but a fair amount of rain. But it curlicues it back through parts of Georgia and South Carolina, and this is where this model comes to an end. But I also want to highlight what happens way back off to the east, and this showed up in the American model as well. I didn't highlight it there because it wasn't quite as stout and robust, but in the European model it has something well back out here to the east coming off the coast of Africa, tightening up pretty good. Again, a reminder that we are reaching the peak of hurricane season, so this isn't that far out of the question. So we've got a lot of time between now and when we'll probably have to worry about Dorian here along the Gulf Coast. However, we've got a couple of models in here suggesting that it may be not a big deal in terms of a true hurricane threat, at least in the models right now, but it is something we're going to have to keep tabs on as we head through the next couple of days, because we may end up in a situation where things are set up to a point where it can get into the Gulf of Mexico. So I'm going to keep with this European model. You can see there's our little circle of Dorian here. This isn't the overall size of the storm. This is the center of the storm getting highlighted. And watch what happens. So here's your purple. Remember, I always say on these 500 millibar maps, the purple stuff is where all the hot air is. That's the center, the highest area of high pressure. Well, as this thing crosses over, it's going to look for a way. These things want to go toward the pole due to Coriolis, and it's going to look for an alleyway between areas of high pressure. And it doesn't find it until it gets out toward, again, Mobile and Pensacola, as one ridge to the east backs out to the east, and the ridge to the west backs off to the west. That allows for this little alleyway for it to move off to the north. So again, we got a lot of time before we got anything really to worry about. And truly, we've got until Thursday, I think, before we're really going to have a good idea about how things are really looking with Dorian with respect to us along the Gulf Coast and here in South Mississippi, or wherever you're watching this from along the Gulf Coast region, whether it's Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, or the Florida Panhandle. But that's a look at your tropical update for August 27th of 2019, brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters.